Right, we've got good news from Guernsey, with Robert Platts in the studio in Guernsey, and we're trying to do a very complicated technical link. We can't get everything to work properly, but anyway, we've got Robert Platts. He's going to explain a wondrous thing happened in Guernsey this week, which was celebrated by a lot of people. In simple terms, what have you got there on the disability front?
Okay, so, I'm going to talk generally about discrimination legislation. What has happened is that we have passed a set of proposals, and I have to be really clear, this is not yet the legislation. These are very detailed policy proposals from which the law officers can go away and write the law. We hope to see that. Well, it's actually an ordinance, but we hope to see this bit of legislation coming back to the States, all nicely written and perfect, but in about 18 months, hopefully. So this is multi-ground legislation. Not all of the bits have been agreed yet, and I'll explain that. The proposals originally were for a three-phase approach. I mean, Jersey's had a phased approach, which the Guernsey business people in particular wanted to see. So originally it was 3 phases, but the amendments this week have made it 2 phases. In phase 1, we have race, disability, carer status, and that's carers of persons with disabilities. And we have sexual orientation, religious belief. That's all in phase 1.
This is one big discrimination law. Is it the whole thing put together? This isn't just about disability. This is about all aspects.
Which is multi-ground.
Right, I get you.
Discrimination legislation.
Right.
So it will prohibit discrimination on all these grounds.
Right.
Phase 2, we will add the ground of age, and it will also incorporate our existing sex discrimination ordinance. And the last thing it'll do is it will deal with equal pay for work of equal value, which we don't have any legislation on yet.
Right.
So that sort of sums up what was passed.
Right.
And I can go through what some good bits are, if you like, and some things that are not so good.
To clarify my brain, a little while ago, maybe there was a proposal. It was all going forward on disability itself. Did that fall? Did that fell? Because that was going to go to the States as well, and they could never get it there.
A while ago.
Yeah, it was.
I think it was back in 2017 or 18.
Right.
The States decided to introduce multi-ground protection instead of just disability.
And that fell by the wayside. Or the original concept
hasn't fallen by the wayside.
It's just been kicked around.
Actually, it's very important that we have multi-ground legislation, because one thing that our legislation will allow us to do is to consider claims involving multiple and intersecting grounds of discrimination, which I don't believe Jersey does. I'm not certain about that, but I don't think it does. And that's really important. In fact, you won't comply with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or CRPD for short, unless you have legislation that does that.
Of course, we haven't ratified that convention yet, and neither of you, presumably. You haven't ratified it yet, the convention.
We can't ratify it,
right?
Nor can you.
No, exactly.
But we can seek to have the UK's ratification extended.
Well, that's what I understand. But as far as islanders are concerned, yeah, we haven't ratified it. The UK hasn't ratified it for the island. But is that proposed? Is that part of this package?
Oh, yeah. That was proposed in November 2013.
Right.
And the government has been working since that time to try to comply with the CRPD. It doesn't yet, but most of it is progressively realisable anyway. But there are only 2 things the CRPD says you must do immediately. One of those is eliminate discrimination.
Right.
So
that's simple enough.
The UK won't extend. Sorry?
That's simple. Eliminate discrimination, just like that. That's a nice thing.
Being ironic.
I'm being ironic.
No, you must take steps to eliminate discrimination. So, in other words, you must introduce anti-discrimination legislation, and you must examine existing policies and law to make sure that discrimination isn't built in.
Just to get my mind in correct working on, you did have Deputy Gollop as a sort of a deputy representing disability issues, and you also had a civil servant. What happened to those?
That was a long time ago.
What happened to all those good measures? Because I thought this is wonderful. They're ahead of us.
No, sorry. John Gollop was a while ago, but since then we've had two other
Right.
members of the states who take on the champion role.
Right.
But we also have a civil servant
Right.
who is a disability officer. Yes.
Does that still exist, that office?
Yes.
And has that person got any powers to do anything? Is it like an access officer or?
No. It advises. It advises the states and helps. That role will help the states to comply with CRPD, but it's not. It'll help the states when committees ask for their help, that person's help. They will explain things. But also, members of the public can go to the disability officer and ask for advice and help, as well as the disability champion.
Right. Okay.
But much more is needed to comply with CRPD in terms of implementation than just having those two people. The whole thing needs to be embedded in the government, and Guernsey still isn't there yet. We're still working towards that. So that's Article 33 is implementation, and as I say, we have a lot of work to do yet to get that. Right.
Is there a projected timescale for this? I mean, is there they say, by such and such a date we'll have a new law in, regulations in? Is that the plan? Is there a plan?
Well, it's impossible to do that because to an extent it depends on the UK. And the UK has changed the way that they extend CRPD. It used to be relatively easy because it was all through the Ministry of Justice. But now I think we have to deal with 20 different departments within the UK. We have basically got to prove where we are in compliance with CRPD articles before they will extend ratification to us. Now, your viewers will want to understand what ratification actually does. Well, the major thing that it does is it starts the monitoring process, the official process, which involves the UN. So every 4 years, a report would be compiled by Guernsey, which would be included in the UK's report to the UN to explain how well we are complying with all the articles of CRPD.
Because that exists already to some extent with other charters and other conventions. It does. There is a reporting process already under different other ones like social, economic, cultural rights, those sort of things, covenants. There is a reporting process which will include some of these things peripherally. That already goes on, presumably.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But not from the CRP.
No, that's right.
Some of the things, but not from a disability, necessarily from a disability specific.
Because Jersey's ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Again, there will be implications under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And now, presumably, Jersey will be reporting on that. So it's sort of a closing in, isn't it? It's coming in from all sides now. Anti-discrimination or whatever the problem is. It's coming in from various quarters. So that presumably is the same. Are those Convention on the Rights of the Child, is that signed up for Guernsey?
Well, we're pursuing that. We haven't got that extended to us yet.
Okay, right, okay.
But then, we were signed up back in 1960 something to the race convention, and we are only just 50 years later, and behind you guys getting our race discrimination law in, which is pretty appalling, isn't it, really?
So when will the first draft of the legislation be made? What prevents them from actually going ahead now and producing a draft and putting it into place as law, which already complies with everything they would be obliged to once the CRPD is in place? Why not go ahead now?
No, just the way round. Sorry, we have to have the law in place before we can get the ratification of CRPD. Right. That's a requirement by the UK, not by the UN. That's a UK requirement.
So you will be drafting a law?
Yes.
Guernsey will be drafting.
My understanding is that within 18 months, that's probably the earliest we will see the actual draft legislation coming back to the states for approval.
Right. And
it will be a tick box.
Have you yourselves drafted one which would be of assistance for them and the model that you would like to follow?
Well, I should have explained earlier that the legislation is largely based on existing legislation in Ireland and Australia. We looked at, when I say we, I'm talking about Guernsey PLC, looked at various models from around the world, including UK and Canada and various other jurisdictions. But in the end, we chose Australia and Ireland as being the basis. So, knowing that, and with the very detailed draft proposals, it should not take too long to be able to draft that legislation.
Now, do you have commentary from practitioners within those jurisdictions as to the efficacy of that legislation?
Absolutely, we do.
And they approve it?
And that's the government as well as the Guernsey Disability Alliance. Sorry?
So the practitioners in those jurisdictions are satisfied that the law fulfills its obligations and can be used to eliminate discrimination.
Yes. Yeah. And we specifically have been engaging with experts from the University of Northern Ireland, Galway. Plus, the GDA has had direct contact with in Australia the Disability Discrimination Commission. So yes, and there's a report on the Australian. They've already reviewed their legislation. Remember, it's been around for 3 decades, and I think Ireland is a couple of decades. So it's very mature legislation to develop from. And the thing about from a disability point of view, the Irish and the Australian definitions of disability are very similar, albeit one word rather changes things in the Irish definition, which is what we've gone for in the end.
And what kind of awards are made under those legislation? What sort of amounts of money? Because in the end, it all comes down to money. Right.
The awards do not meet international standards, rather like the awards in Jersey don't.
Excellent.
They are too small, and I don't think they will be. They won't be effective and dissuasive as they are required to be by CRPD. But that is one of the compromises that we have had to swallow. And this does mean that it will weaken the legislation, because some people who might have made a claim won't. And then the other side of it is that instead of dissuading people from discriminating, some people might view those rather paltry sums as a fee to discriminate.
Indeed.
Yeah. But we are where we are, and at the moment we've got nothing. So this will be better than nothing. And from a disability perspective, a lot of the changes we hope will come through things like the requirement to produce accessibility plans. Now that only applies now to the public sector, which is a bit of a shame. But what this will allow is the progressive realisation of accessibility within the public sector, and it means that accessibility can only be challenged, I'm afraid, through indirect discrimination rather than being a particular duty. But that does comply with CRPD.
And what forum have you got for the resolution of disputes? You've got an employment tribunal there in Guernsey.
No, we haven't got an employment tribunal. We've got an employment and discrimination tribunal. There's always been a discrimination and employment tribunal. That will deal with the claims coming through employment and access to goods and services. What we haven't determined yet is how complaints in the field of education will be dealt with. That will be decided hopefully within a shortish period of time. I hope that it's the same tribunal, because we should. Because
how robust is that tribunal? What sort of resources has it got in terms of funds and legal knowledge?
Right, great question. At the moment, it has some legal knowledge, but not built into the panel. The provisions which were agreed this week are to strengthen that so that there will be a legally qualified chair. Now, that I'd argue that we needed that with or without the discrimination legislation.
That
so
is
that is going
vital.
to be.
That is absolutely vital, because
Yes,
in the
indeed.
end, this comes.
So we've got that.
Yeah.
I'm impressed by your obvious grasp of the subject, and I'm also impressed by the turnout of people that were outside the States building this week. And I'm impressed also you had people like Centre for Accessible Environments doing tutorials. This has been going on for several years. A lot of knowledge has been spread in Guernsey. So unlike Jersey. And there's a lot of people in Guernsey understand or have received information and knowledge and training. Do you think they're going to be an effective lobby? Will they stick together and force these issues into place? Will they keep on the ball?
So there are several lobby groups now, and the good thing about all this, and probably the good thing about it being multi-ground, is the GDA, the Guernsey Disability Alliance, has spread the knowledge of why it's important to consider all the other grounds. And now we've been working very closely with organisations like Equality Guernsey and Liberate and so on. And, we are an effective team together. I would say that whilst education has improved, it's human rights are hardly top of the agenda for most people in Guernsey.
Yes.
And the really bad thing, if you're going to say really bad, is, one of the poor things about our legislation is that we still are not going to have an independent equality and rights organisation that would have done that education and would have been so good for everybody. But our Chief Minister has made a pledge to look further again at this, so especially if he's around, which I think he will be in the next term, to look again, because even he understands now, having himself stood up and said, actually, I really need help to understand race discrimination. I think he's now starting to understand that if he found it difficult with race, he would find it very difficult to understand disability discrimination.
Exactly.
So hopefully that something might happen, but unfortunately it's needed now. In fact, it was needed years ago, but we haven't got it, but we might get it in the future.
Is there a firm hand upon his shoulder to ensure that he does what he says he's going to do? Because those who are seeking to achieve it must be aware of the dangers of betrayal, that what has been promised will not be delivered, and they should in advance...
He's been very careful not to promise delivery of an equality and rights organisation. He's just said he's going to look at it. So that's all he's pledged at the moment.
Well, politicians love the word "look at it." It's called kicking the can down the road. It's a way of avoiding actually implementation, and it's a way of keeping things going without ever changing anything.
For this is the beauty of conventions like CRPD, because you have a very active group in Guernsey who are pressing for CRPD to be realised quite quickly, and when it is ratified, that really will produce quite an impetus to get things going. Now, let's look at one of the articles in CRPD. That is CRPD Article 8, which is all about awareness raising. It very, very clearly explains what we have to do and what governments have to do to raise awareness of persons with disabilities and to get rid of the stereotypes. Guernsey and Jersey together are pretty stuck in the charity mode, aren't we?
Absolutely.
When we look at disability.
Yeah.
Charity and pity and medical mode. All that's got to go. We've started and we are improving people's understandings, but we have an awful long way to go to get a much better understanding of a human rights approach to disability.
Among the groups that are supporting, do you get support from trade unions? Are they participating in this?
They have done in the past, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, you've got
we have contacts with them.
You still haven't managed to hatch a political party yet. If one does get hatched, do you think is that likely that they'll be supporting? Will they grab it as an issue?
Why would this be a political party? This should be a movement, surely.
Well, there you are.
It's a movement, isn't it?
I think we're more likely to see a political party that doesn't support human rights.
Right.
Probably. I don't know. But,
I mean, there's so many aspects. I mean, human rights, I live, breathe human rights, and I try to create interest. People are not, for some reason, they talk about, I know my rights, housing is a human right, and they never come up with any documentation, no article to say that. So, but they use these expressions in such a bleak way.
You have in place there a movement, a group which is you must ensure that it's not demobilised, that it doesn't give up just because it
won't be demobilised. And we've done some very practical things will actually change our island over time. One of those things is we now have education about human rights lodged in our curriculum in all our schools.
It's excellent.
Can I stop you?
That wasn't in my education. It should have been.
No.
There's a phrase from the economist Keynes who says that in the long run we're all dead. I think what that emphasises is that there is a need for urgency. We don't want heaven and the promised land in 100 years. We would quite like it tomorrow, and it is achievable. And we lived in certain times in these past through months where we realised that governments can achieve amazing things when there is the political will. What is very obvious is that there is no political will on the part of existing governments and those who run it.
The governments, no. But I've been so absolutely knocked out by...
That will change. We've just had the legislation here go through unanimously. Sorry, the proposals go through unanimously. That things will change as people understand what human rights are. We have a very perverse view. There's quite a perverted view in the UK about human rights. People are very sceptical, driven by exceptional cases. People think, human rights are destructive. They get in the way of doing what we want to do.
Well, you have a very well-organised right-wing media which dominates the political debate, and that needs to be challenged. But
I'd say human rights aren't necessarily a right-wing or left-wing thing, are they?
Universal.
But
This
those
is the whole
who
basis.
oppose it,
Of course
those who
they do.
oppose human rights are on the political right.
Out of
and they're
ignorance.
extremely wealthy. You have one who lives just offshore from you.
Yeah, that's right.
Who
But
owns a major
yes, indeed, and we've had some of them who've actually said, I think that Guernsey businesses should be able to seek economic advantage from not respecting human rights. Now, that's, to most people, that's abhorrent, isn't it? That goes back to days of slavery. So you have still got a minority of people who are thinking this way. We probably won't change their opinions ever, but we could change the groundswell of opinion about human rights. And that is the process that started several years ago in Guernsey.
Well, Nick and I, we went to
we just had 5,000 signatures on a petition calling for the legislation to be supported.
Well, that's tremendous, because we have problems getting 10 people into a room to discuss politics.
That's right. It's dreadful. It's dreadful.
How is it you have achieved that?
Can I suggest it needs to start with groups, interested groups. So somebody needs to start the equivalent of a Guernsey Disability Alliance in Jersey.
I used to come to Guernsey. Years ago when I was very active in disability discrimination, all these issues here. And people say, "Oh, you're Mike Dunn. We wish you were here." Now, if I look at Guernsey, I say, I wish I was there. I mean, it's turned around totally. I'm so impressed with what you're doing.
To be fair, it does rely on volunteers, and I volunteered my time. I never expected it to be 13 years.
No.
I said I'd give it a year, and Shalane Green is another name you will
Absolutely,
have heard,
I've interviewed her.
She gave nearly a decade.
That's right.
So for no money at all.
You've touched on the subject. I was just going to
do that.
And are there young ones coming up behind you who will carry the baton? Are there the young ones coming up behind you who will carry on?
That's a great question. We've had a new group form called Guernsey Against Discrimination.
Right.
They are almost entirely young, and they are very knowledgeable. And they have been very active in particularly the last 3 or 4 months. So yes, there are younger people coming through. I know I'm getting I'm going to be put out to pasture soon. So yes, we need.
Well, I'm interested to hear about such an organisation, but immediately there's a little title. What was it called?
Guernsey Against Discrimination.
Guernsey Against Discrimination. Would that also embrace your Latvians, your Romanians?
Indeed.
It's all residents. Do they get involved?
That is exactly. It's everybody, and it's.
I've got a great
because in Jersey, you see, if we talk about Jersey beans and locals, it's a concept which is designed to exclude certain people.
Is excluded.
And that is in fact the majority of islanders. It's a means and mechanism of disciplining them and saying, shut up, be quiet, this is not your island and you have no rights.
That's right, you can't. If you don't like it,
we do have a group like that. It's a Facebook group rather than anything else. And I think that the young group, the Guernsey Against Discrimination, the clue is in the title. It's against discrimination, not just Guernsey. It means every Guernsey resident.
And what is their sort of background? What is driving them? Because it does seem to be
really varied.
There is. We can all say, oh, there's all sorts of factors, but I'm asking you, what would you put it down to? The fact that here's a small group. But it's mobilised, it's active,
they're not so small.
To change things.
So small,
it's not so small.
No.
How come? Because the islands, traditionally the Channel Islands, for the past 75 years, there has been little in the way of active, organised opposition to represent the interests of working people.
Yeah.
How is it? What's the phenomena that's driving them? Why are these youth? Is it education?
I have to be clear. This is not just about representing the views of working people. This is about everybody. And the whole message. I tell you, one of the things that's changed is COVID-19 has really brought Guernsey together. The whole spirit of the island working together as one,
as a community,
to improve our society, has helped spawn these groups. Plus, to be honest, it is the work of the Guernsey Disability Alliance, which itself has spawned the group Equality Guernsey, and initiatives like We All Matter A. That all came out of the
brilliant.
The Guernsey Disability
Absolutely brilliant.
Alliance.
So you've managed to use. We're all together A.
Yeah.
Was that what it was?
Yeah.
No, so We All Matter A.
Yeah, we all matter. Okay, that's fantastic because what you've got there is a universal principle, and you've kind of added to a little gloss, which presumably is a reflection, like in Jersey, of the expression but yes, A, which is a kind of Jersey way of saying things. So you've managed to encapsulate and embrace a form of nationalism, and also within its core is a universalism, which is non-discriminatory.
Can I just say, we're going to have to stop eventually, but Nick and I went to a scrutiny meeting one day, and there was a lady there speaking from one of the business organisations, and she was explaining how internationally you can't be discriminatory, and whether it's women's rights or this is it. Firms now dealing internationally want firms that have got a good record on things such as discrimination, eliminating discrimination. This sells internationally, and she was amazing lady, wasn't she? It was refreshing to hear that, and now they're actually talking about ethical business now internationally, ethical finance. And another thing about the finance business or any business. We all start off as babies in prams. We're all disabled to start our lives. We can't do anything when we're born. And we go through life, and some of us gain abilities and wealth, but so many people finish up being disabled. And it is a sort of an equaliser. It is a warning that lots of people say, oh, he's an arch right-wing capitalist, all the rest of it. But if he finishes up in a wheelchair, or he's blind, or he goes deaf, all of a sudden he or she becomes a bit more aware about discrimination. It hits them, doesn't it? And it's awful way a bit, perhaps.
I think there are some very, very important principles that CRPD explains about disability, about disability discrimination, the way it should be enacted and the way it should be developed. And it's one of the principles it says is this is not about protecting a group of people.
No.
And I'm afraid the UK legislation and Jersey legislation talks very much about characteristics and qualifying within those characteristics. The Guernsey legislation talks about the grounds of.
Right.
So we are protecting on the ground of. We are not protecting individuals per se. I mean, it has that effect, of course it does. Unfortunately, because we have put a qualification in, for instance, our definition of disability, which is to placate the business groups, you have to have an impairment for 6 months. Which again, I would argue is not fully in line with CRPD. But even so, this is not about just protecting a person.
No, I understand that, but
protecting the person's right.
the Jersey figure is that there are 30,000 people, and Nick will say obviously the ruling has everybody's disabled, everybody's affected, but there are 30,000 people in Jersey affected by disability. They may not be the disabled person, but the carers and everybody looks out in their family, 30,000 people. You try and get a dozen of those 30,000 at a meeting and it's impossible, but they're out there and they are affected.
I don't believe it is impossible.
No.
You know, I don't mean to be funny, but I managed it.
Well, there you are.
in Guernsey. And I think it is possible, but you have to start with the disability groups.
Yeah.
So you have to start with all the charities, first of all, and then grow it from there. But you need somebody who is able, understands the subject, and who has lots of time.
Of course, usually the person who leads these campaigns is not somebody with a visible disability. In other words, they're a very able person, usually. And that's one of the problems to overcome. If somebody has communications problems, it's very difficult to have that person as a leader of a group. I've encountered it so many times where people get frustrated because they can't, for various reasons, express themselves. They can't get to meetings, they can't do this and that because of their disability. It impinges on what they can do. It's tragic.
Well, it wouldn't if you were complying with CRPD.
Absolutely. I know that.
And well, interestingly though, somebody recently said they mistook me to be. They thought I was chairman of Guernsey Disability Alliance, and I am no longer chairman. But somebody said, "Well, Rob, you're not the right person to be chairman because you don't have a visible disability. You should be in a wheelchair."
Exactly.
And I thought, oh my God.
That's right. That's it. Stereotype. It does, but it helps in a sense. It's
what you just need to find somebody there who has got the time, and it's difficult because and the energy. I started all this, when I was still in my 40s. I'm now, coming up to mid-60s, so.
You're a mere youngster.
I don't have quite the energy I have.
In Jersey, there is.
You need somebody with plenty of energy. I'm not saying you can't find somebody my age with the energy. Of course you can. There is somebody with the time to do it, and it does take a lot of time.
There is a lot of poverty in Jersey, and much of it is generated by disability. But those people themselves are and feel themselves to be powerless. And those that hold power are quite happy with that situation, because there is no challenge to them. That means it doesn't cost them any money, and they're very happy that these people remain where they are and silent. And as a consequence, very little changes. And it's an island with a culture. This Jersey is an island with a culture which is very hostile towards criticism. It will cost you your job and your career.
Well, that might be the case. Obviously, you know it much better than I do. I think people might think that about some people here, but I've got to say we're going to be stealing a march, because when we start to show the change that CRPD makes in Guernsey, if Jersey isn't doing those things as well, then we are going to have an economic advantage over you guys. And I think that will wake Jersey up, because nothing speaks louder than money.
Absolutely.
Jersey's rulers think they have done all that is necessary in relation to discrimination. They have some legislation, they've now implemented it, and they have some judgments, and they have a tribunal which will deal with claims. However,
they haven't listened to any experts if you've employed the same experts as we have, they would tell you that in many ways you do not comply with CRPD. The
Well-
experts, to be fair, say that your law in general is good. It is specifically things to do with the way you deal with disability, which do not comply with the convention.
What we would like to have from you, and I suspect you can communicate to us, is that critique of the Jersey legislation, so that we can
Well,
put
we've done it. We've done it before, and Jersey have taken no notice of it.
Well, it must be repeated, and we are the activists who will take it, because we want to see an improved piece of legislation, and we will put pressure on government, on ministers, and on civil servants to justify why their legislation is inadequate, and why they think that an inadequate piece of legislation is satisfactory. They have to explain that to us and to the public, to the disabled, who are not satisfied. And if there is no criticism, if there's no revolt, if there's no pressure, our ministers, our rulers will simply leave things go, because if they're not disturbed, they'll happily drink their tea.
Okay, my understanding is that the evaluation had been shared already with your government. They weren't really interested. In fact, I think...
No, there you are. Point proved. They're
very
indifferent.
Happy to share we've done a brief evaluation, the GPA, and we've included some points from the experts in the University of Ireland in Galway, and I'm very happy to share that with you. I'll send that by email to you.
For public consumption. I mean, the public, this is the problem, getting the public, I mean, they've got a Convention on the Rights of the Child, and I keep saying them, send a copy of the convention to every household. Okay, it's all very well, but they don't. Every household should have that.
You can do that with CRPD, but unless you are able to explain in very simple terms what CRPD actually effects are.
Exactly.
So you need an organisation that tries to explain that to everybody.
We've got a commissioner, we've got a human right, we've got a Jersey rights officer specifically. What are they doing? The commissioner, obviously, the commissioner's doing her bit. She's challenging. I don't know what the rights officer does. I've no idea.
Can I ask for your comments on some of the stings in the tail of the Jersey legislation? And there are many things.
We're going to have to about part two. Because nobody will watch all this.
No, it doesn't need to be. But it can be edited. And something called editing.
No, not in my world.
It's
there are a couple.
The award. Can I deal with two things? The awards and time limits. Awards and time limits. Awards
and time limits. That's two. But the ones that really concern me are the definition, because it's not CRPD compliant. And also the way that your legislation deals with the reasonable adjustment duty. It is not specific enough as a duty. You do it through a form of indirect discrimination, which does not comply with CRPD. For instance, it doesn't explicitly ask or demand that the employer or service provider consults with the disabled person about the reasonable adjustment. That is a specific thing that it doesn't comply with. It's a very simple thing to put right. It could be done by amendment. But these things are reasonably simple. The definition thing is not so simple.
Okay, on the amendment, I will take you up on that. If you have the area where you think it can be easily amended, we will bring that legislation to a politician who will put it forward as a proposition. It will then spark a debate. It will force government to defend its indefensible position, and it'll bring forth these issues. Can I take you back to time limits and to awards? Awards in Jersey are very low. The maximum is £5,000.
Yeah.
And the going rate is £1,000 for the most horrendous. The going rate, as determined by the chairman, is no more than £1,000. The consequence of that is who's going to be bothered to bring such legislation when you can only to bring such an action? What employer?
Can I explain? The consequences are much further than that. If you have awards so low, what does that say about the government that introduced it, about of how important it believes discrimination is?
Right.
Now, we are both we are both sitting in islands that have suffered terribly from discrimination. The Germans invaded us both, and that all came out of discrimination and non-respect for human rights. So I would have thought that our governments should be very interested in doing the right thing.
Well, the Germans have gone, the fascists have gone, but there is a government in place that represents the interests of the most wealthy and powerful in probably the world. They are indifferent to the suffering of the mass of ordinary people. And
I don't think
and we
they
have
are.
we have
I don't think they see it.
we've got a 70% voter abstention. People are registered to vote, but they do not vote because they do not think that governments represent them. And those who hold power are very happy with that situation.
We're going to have to stop the discussion, but the final question I will put to you is, will you have a government, when they have this election, will you still have a government? Will it work, this strange election you're having, the next one?
Oh, I'm really worried about that. I mean, it could go either way. It could be worse than what we got. I'm really worried, and I'm worried about the emergence of parties that might not actually be very helpful.
And this sort of legislation, anti-discrimination legislation generally, I mean, obviously we don't know who is going to get elected, but from what you hear, the tom-toms, is it going to be a more progressive government, you think, once they get elected?
I don't know, but I know one thing for sure, that if whoever comes in tries to delay or get rid of the proposals that have been democratically agreed, we talk about not ever having any, we've thankfully haven't had any race riots or anything like that, but we have burning human rights issues here which people are starting to see, and any government coming in try to ignore all the people who have supported this legislation now, then they would be they wouldn't be in power very long, let's put it that way.
You have a government created of individuals who all say, oh, we're powerless because it depends on what the others have to say about it. In fact, you've got a ruling party that runs Guernsey, like it does in Jersey, and denies the fact that it is a ruling party. And there is no opposition.
Well, explain that. Where do you think this ruling party is?
The ruling party is finance and its interests. And that's they have
captured resources.
They have captured the island economically and politically, and they run the islands in the interest of the most wealthy. And they've forgotten ordinary islanders.
I would agree with you there that there is a focus of power in our Policy and Resources Committee. They have a lot of sway because they hold the purse strings. Yeah.
Jan, we're going to have to stop. There's one absolute final question. You're exactly the right age to be in the States. Any aspirations?
No, absolutely none. I was meant to retire 40 years ago, and I probably worked harder in my retirement. So, no, I promised to spend some time with my family.
Right.
And
okay. We're going to stop. Maybe we'll come back to you and maybe generate some issues. Maybe we'll come back and talk again. But
no, we will, because we must maintain that it needs to be a pan-island solidarity, which has never existed.
Never.
Guernsey is perceived as a strange place we shouldn't speak to.
I have something else I can help you with here, actually.
Yeah.
In all the work that we've been doing, we've made all sorts of contacts around the world with various experts. Right. One of them is a chap called David Baker, who is a human rights lawyer from Canada. So, and he is really, really interested in helping other jurisdictions. Right. He's trying to set up a network to help other jurisdictions.
Right.
But you need some groups there. He's not going to talk to individuals. He would come over and talk to your government or whatever. And,
we'll go around the graveyard and dig up some supporters, because that's where they mostly seem to be.
That's what you need. You need to be starting, in my view, with the disability charities that we need to get rid of in the end, by the way.
I know.
But you have to start with them. And
well, even the role of charities,
their members.
Even the role of charities is an issue here, which has got its own huge issues. Thank you so much for joining us. So much.
I'll play any time.
Okay.
Yeah, we will speak again, because I think I'd love to read your critique of the Jersey law.
Yeah, I'll send that over shortly.
Yeah, I want to have the ideas. And we can then disseminate.
And that contact's name.
Yeah, and your contact.
Okay.
Thanks
Great.
a lot.
Right, okay. Well, I tell you, before I do that, he's got to set up a system, so it's not going to happen overnight.
Okay, okay.
And I'm talking to him about it now.
Right.
But there are other people that you can talk to. There are a lot, once you get a group together, then it's much easier. They're probably not going to talk to individuals,
Indeed.
to be honest.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye bye.